I suppose I want to set the stage a little bit for you and for listeners. To why I'm excited and where I can. I'm excited to. There's many possible paths that this conversation could take. So, um, but from a kind of a level setting perspective, I'm a layperson. I don't have a technical training in any scientific domain or computer science. I've been a meditator for on and off for 20 plus years or so, with varying degrees of frustration and progress, you could say. Um, Professionally, I've been writing about the emerging psychedelic field, mostly about the science, the policy, the businesses that are forming. Just really fascinated by this kind of emergent paradigm, you might say. And what has occurred to me over the last few years is that, or this is how I'm modeling it, that psychedelics are a part of a larger sort of paradigm movement, you might say. I know that is a term that people might take umbrage with, but I know it has a technical sort of meaning in the Thomas Kuhnian sense, but part of it is this.
I actually agree with
Okay.
that. I think actually it is used technically. I think there is a paradigm shift, and within that, psychedelics is part of the in John Vervaeke's words, is part of the ecology of practices.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Um, and again, to the scent that I'm picking up on, the sort of first port of call here is this idea of, and now I'm not sure where these terms differ from each other, but free energy principle, Bayesian brain hypothesis, predictive processing, active inference, computational neuroscience. Like this feels like a the tech, the ground of the tectonic shift, to mix metaphors. If that kind of connects the pieces of psychedelics and psychiatry and psychology and contemplative practice, and just the fact of perception and experience. Um, the One of the things that I think you're particularly keen on is this interface between this paradigm shift of free energy principle therein and contemplative practice. These long-standing traditions that have been around across time and space, that have some similarities, differences, overlaps. And my hunch here, my intuition, is that the culture of both the scientific culture and the sort of the larger culture is sort of undergoing a shift from, let's call it, mindfulness, focused awareness, concentration as sort of the thin edge of the wedge of contemplative practices in the West, to now these more esoteric states, non-duality, and the terms that have kind of come along with the Buddhist program are being taken seriously, you might say, or being explored again, compared to, let's say, 10, 20 years ago. From again, this is a hunch, a intuition. um, I realize I'm rambling here. I have all these notes to kind of get through, but the two final pieces of this intro, again, for both you and for listeners, is, we're at a particular moment in history, and you might define that the sort of the major themes here for this conversation are, you might call the mental health crisis, or the meta crisis, to use a John Vervaeke phrase. Um, the emergence of psychedelic science, kind of this kind of rekindling of that domain, as well as like frontier and novel interventions or approaches for, let's call it, human flourishing, human suffering, neurotech, etc. And then obviously like artificial intelligence, right? Like this to me is like kind of forces us to, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be sentient? What does it mean to have valence, right? And sort of the as a I don't know if it's appropriate to call it a species of intelligence, but it's just like wildly fascinating, if nothing else. And then finally, I feel that because of this emergent paradigm that I'll just kind of call the free energy principle broadly. What are the implications thereof? And I think I'll just say from my experience, the talks that you've given and the ways in which you've articulated it have actually been helpful for my practice, right? Like there is actually cash value in ironically, the concepts that you're offering to kind of progress along the path, I would say. So I hope to come to that, but my hunch here, my intuition is that that may apply to psychiatry broadly, psychology broadly. Is this a sort of a new foundation for understanding human well-being, human flourishing, subjective experience that then lends itself to how the practitioners and the professionals, the psychiatrists, the psychologists, the mental health counselors, the meditation teachers, the medical doctors, does it recast how we are considering these broad topics? I'll close my mouth now and sort of just say like that is sort of the foundational layer that kind of brought us here, and where I'd love to go is just like I've said my piece, and I think that sets us up hopefully for a good time here.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that was a grand introduction, and thank you, because I actually think that all of those elements are exactly part of the landscape that is important to human flourishing.
Yeah.
And actually, you've done a fantastic job in articulating all of it, including things like trying to understand how artificial intelligence works, and what that tells us about human flourishing as well. And I particularly like this is very prescient, really, because I've been thinking that what really matters in the end is human flourishing. And of course, human flourishing may entail, of course, caring about the flourishing of the planet, caring about the flourishing of other species. So no one should get wrong this idea that human flourishing is it means that you don't care about the flourishing of other species or flourishing of Gaia or flourishing of the universe.
Yeah.
I think these things are intimately connected, and I think, given that you set up a grand stage, why don't I follow that tack? And it starts, I think, like this. All great philosophies of life start with how do we understand ourselves, our human condition, the nature of our human nature, our existential position, and that goes all the way back to Aristotle and Plato, who basically had an idea of what it is, what the human psyche is, and they were very prescient. They had this idea that the human psyche is composed of various parts, and the fact is that these parts don't always cohere, and there's a kind of a civil war in the psyche, and that disharmony is essentially the disharmony of our soul and leads to unhappiness. And for Plato and Aristotle, essentially that harmony in the soul was human flourishing. The Greek word, as Aristotle would have used it, is eudaimonia. And And for Aristotle, he actually says that what we need to do is cultivate, reconstruct ourselves. I'm using modern language, reconstruct ourselves with excellences of our human capacities. Now, that is
Mm.
actually technically correct. People think about it as virtue, but the
Hmm.
Greek word for virtue is arete, and the translation of arete is actually excellence.
Mm.
So what he's saying is that, is can we reconstruct ourselves so that our patterns, our habits, our dispositions, our belief structures become recrafted and become excellent. What were those excellences for him? They were, wisdom and morality and some sort of self mastery or self control,
Mm.
and some mastery over one's emotions. For example, courage, not to be
Mm.
fearful or anxious. Now, we can't go back 2,500 years and use some idea of what it is to be human coming from the ancient Greeks. We can't go back to the time of Buddha
Yeah.
or others. We have progressed so much in our science, and whatever and we start to understand ourselves in more detail. Now, these old paradigms are very, very helpful, but what is unhelpful is to have a cognitive dissonance between our best theories, the theories of science, which have made huge progress in medicine and get us to the moon and get us the iPhone, and our understanding of ourselves. And that's where I think we start with this computational view.
Mm.
And that is, so when we look at our fundamental existential position, we say, we are these organisms somehow thrown into the world, it looks like. And what we've understood is that we're receiving sensory data. Okay, we're receiving sensory data. And we have some information, and we got to make sense of this world and somehow survive as individuals, as a species. And what do we do with this information? How do we use it optimally? Well, there's a kind of a mathematical, theoretical optimal use of information. It's encapsulated in something called Bayesian inference. So it's just something that can be just shown from first principles that if you are not doing Bayesian inference, you are somehow leaving money on the table. You're leaving information value on the table. Now, from an evolutionary perspective, if a species is leaving money on the table, a
Mm.
species that leaves less money on the table
Mm.
will survive. So we can assume that evolution is approximating towards Bayesian inference. And in fact, because Bayesian inference can't actually be solved theoretically, technically, we've had to figure out rules of thumbs and algorithms in evolution and in the human brain, but also in artificial intelligence. In fact, the
Mm.
same similar algorithms to use information well. Now, what does using information well mean? Using information well is to create representations and understanding of the world so that I can act well in the world, act in such a way that enhances the probability of my survival. I can get food, I can get mates, I can protect myself, I can procreate, etc.
And when you're
And
saying information, just for perhaps listeners who you're referring to, correct me if I'm wrong, the information that's coming through our sense gates, our vision, our sound, smell, taste, touch,
right.
information that's coming from the environment, information that's coming from our 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 body, our organism itself, right? Like,
Right, exactly.
yeah,
So, in fact, all sensory information, including information about the state of our viscera, about the state of
yeah,
our body, in fact, even information about the brain,
mm,
because that's a sort of a deeper topic. But
even information about the organ that is kind of rendering and processing the information itself.
right,
It's
the brain
interesting.
has to
Yeah.
kind of make sense of what the brain's doing.
Oh,
That's a deep
interesting.
thing. And that way down, we'll talk about this. Maybe
Yeah.
that's where we get going with consciousness. All right, but let's leave consciousness aside for the moment.
Yes.
And so what happens is that this is our existential situation, that we have to make sense of the world. Now, how do we do that? I mean, I'm not going to go through all the kind of mathematical details, because that's all in the free energy approach and active inference, approximate Bayesian inference. But roughly speaking, since you can't solve these equations explicitly, they're what's called computation explosive, you do this very, very simple hack, which is you have to simulate what you think is going on in the world and then compare the output of this internal model, the simulation, with the sensory data that you're getting. And that gives you a prediction error. Mm-hmm. And that prediction error then allows you to adjust the parameters of your simulation, the knobs and dials of your simulation, to minimize the prediction error. And so, as many have said, a great neuroscientist, Chris Frith, I think was really one of the first who said that our experience is really a controlled hallucination. Mm-hmm. It's controlled unless we have mental illness, because it's a hallucination which is attempting to minimize prediction error, and therefore, to some extent, trying to get a grip on the world. Okay, so where does that leave us? Okay, sounds all very theoretical, but what it leaves us is this basic idea that we construct our own experience. Not any which way. It's constructed in a special way which allows us to survive and is minimizing prediction error. But essentially, there are many ways to construct our experience. And the first thing to say is that just because we construct our experience and look out at the world, and you can see where you're at, and I can see this office with all these plants, and I can see trees outside. Okay, that doesn't mean reality is like that. In fact, we couldn't know what reality is like using our normal models, because we've always lived within our models. And this was the insight of Immanuel Kant, who basically was kind of like the Isaac Newton of philosophy. Mm-hmm. But he encapsulates this idea to say that actually we are living in our phenomenal world, the world as we experience it. We are constructing this phenomenal world. The world as it is in itself, the Ding an sich, the noumenal world, we actually can't know anything about. But that's okay, because so long as we live in our phenomenal world and therefore act from within it, and somehow those actions allow us to survive, that's okay. We've got a self-consistent internal simulation which is somehow allowing us to survive. It clearly must be in some sense a good representation of reality, but we must be silent about reality for the moment. And so that, as an existential situation, is incredibly powerful, because suddenly it takes us away from this view that is there, with the scientific revolution, that we can know an objective reality. That somehow there's this objective reality, and what science and what we're trying to do is figure out this objective reality. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, what we're really doing is making maps or models of this reality. But to some extent, we will never get to check our maps, except we can only act within our maps. And the checking of the map, whether it's a good map or a bad map, is roughly speaking, does this model help us predict our sensory data? If so, yes, it's a good map. Does this map or these belief structures, do they cohere with other belief structures? In other words, are they relatively internally coherent? If they are, they're kind of good beliefs. Are these beliefs, is this map economical and parsimonious? Do we need angels dancing on pinheads within our ontology? No, we would like the most simple and parsimonious ontology
Right.
to explain the sensory data. That's called Occam's razor. So we have all these criteria of what makes a good map. Now, what ancient technologies have figured out is that through meditation and through spontaneous experiences and through psychedelics and through the cultivation of various practices, and sometimes just out of the blue, one can become aware of the fact that we are somehow living within our own constructed model of our reality. Let's call it a reality model or a world model.
Yep.
Sometimes I call it a generative phenomenal world model. In our latest paper, we call it the reality model because it's kind of nice. And not only are we living within our own reality model, but this avatar, this is going to be visual as well as audio, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, good. So I'm pointing to that, right? Only. This avatar is also within my own reality model, including the thoughts that are happening, including the body sensations. But here's a funny thing. If you ask most people, like, okay, so where are you? Where are you conscious from? Most people in modern societies would say, I'm kind of somewhere behind my eyes. And maybe in some traditional societies, they might say, I'm in my heart area.
Yeah.
But they're kind of thinking that they're somewhere within this avatar. But in fact, this whole experience, this whole reality model, including the phenomenal self, this avatar, this self that I feel like I am, is all happening within my awareness. Okay, so through these various practices, meditation, psychedelics, spontaneous experiences, religious experiences, one can suddenly wake up to the fact that actually things are not things are not naively real as we think they are. That this is a kind of an internal model or a dream or a simulation. We are actually all within the matrix, our own matrix. And it's not that you wake up outside of the matrix. What you do is you wake up within the matrix. So you become like lucid dreaming. You become lucid within the simulation. So that kind of experience is associated with awakening. And there are different levels or types of awakening, but this is the kind of core phenomenological part. And then, of course, there's many interpretations on top of that to say, what is that? What does it mean? Am I the universe? Am I God? Am I reality? But let's just stick just to this. So we see that right from Bayesian inference, from the free energy principle, from this understanding that's coming from our best neuroscience and our best philosophy, and our own human experience, we can start to realize, okay, what I take myself to be, what I think all of this stuff is real, but it's no longer real. It's a mental construction. This day reification, so reification is when some things are real. This day reification of your world has radical changes in terms of the way it starts to affect one's beliefs, one's grippings, one's desires, what really matters, meaning in life, what this is all about. And in fact, they're mostly very positive. Because the first thing that happens is that if these things are just mental constructions, you know, when I get all caught up and say, oh, I really have to win at this game of Monopoly, you know, it's like a matter of life and death, right? Okay, you know, it's just a game. Relax. It's okay. It's just what's happening on the TV screen right now. So that gripping starts to release. That gripping, and the gripping at what I want and gripping and pushing away what I don't want is really the root cause of a lot of psychological suffering. So there is this radical shift in the degree of psychological suffering. And that's rather wonderful. You know, it's just the beginning. But then there's more, because there is, well, okay, so if I'm not this character that I take myself to be, what am I? Well, is that even make sense? Do I have to identify with anything? Actually, maybe really there isn't an answer to this, but I could have other stories about it. Now, given that I just said that we only live within our phenomenal world, we're not going to get away from stories. We're not going to get away from like belief structures. Actually, there is no way out unless you're sitting in a Himalayan cave in a state of deep samadhi, right? You're always within a story structure. But we can now, with this kind of liberated view, we can start to shift our stories. And some of those stories can actually get better or more interesting, that can be more conducive to human flourishing. So we already talked about like just somehow not gripping so much. So that's very good because, you know, suffering is a great blight on human flourishing. But there is a sense of meaning that can arise, because if I'm not this character, or if this character is still arising, and you know, this doesn't mean it's not there. This is a character that's arising. But what's actually arising? Well, actually, one story, and I use the word story just provocatively, right?
Sure.
One view might be a little bit more kind. One view is that actually there's just the whole universe unfolding, whatever that is. Like, and within the universe, there are parts of the universe that become whirlpools, and they continue over time, and they're you know, that's who we are. You're one whirlpool, I'm another whirlpool, you know, and with these whirlpools kind of have information processing and have a model of the world, and so to some extent we are views of the universe upon the universe, partial perspectives of the universe onto the universe. Right? So that's another story. That's a beautiful story. Why is it a beautiful story? Because it can give us a bigger sense. We can connect us to something much bigger, which takes us away from our narrow concerns. And that way of looking can be very powerful, can be very meaningful, can bring great love, can bring great joy. These are parts of human flourishing. Human flourishing is not just that I don't get a lot of psychological suffering. Human flourishing is that I find meaning and love and connection and care and joy in the world. These are all still human emotions. We're not getting out of the game unless you go to the Himalayan cave, right? But we are reimagining, reconstructing the game. I'll just pause there and
Yeah,
let's
that was brilliant. Thank you. There's a if I can let me see if I can kind of pull on the threads that are most relevant to me. There's so many different things I want to ask. In maybe here's one. Like, let's take the example of a chair, you know, a table in the room here. You know, I'm touching it. I can feel it. I'm looking at it. You know, if somebody else were to come in, they would touch it and feel it, and probably our sort of experience of this table would, I'm assuming, would correlate, would match up. There would be some consensus about that. Perhaps I'm wrong, right?
yeah,
I'm trying to find like as objective reality as I possibly can, and then kind of testing it with, you know, n equals 2 to 1,000. We're probably all going to feel, see, notice the same thing. Contrast that to, you know, the side eye look I get from my wife, you know, and then all of a sudden there is this, what did that mean? There's a bodily felt sense of, like, did I not do something? Did I not pick the kids up from school? Like, what, does
yeah,
that make sense? There is a,
absolutely, absolutely.
there's sort of like this emotional, there's an objective. Again, I'm trying to, you know, sense data that's
Yeah,
coming in of the movement of her face and the eyes, and then there's an interpretation of that, and that to me makes clear sense of, like, I'm constructing the value of that expression and the experience based on what it means relevant to our life together, right? But the table is just a table.
absolutely. Okay, so this is a very good example. You know, we humans are going to pick up, with our way of constructing three-dimensional objects flowing in time, with a sense of causality. We're going to pick up on things like tables and chairs and rocks, and importantly snakes and food and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
in very, very similar ways. That doesn't, just because there's a kind of a similarity there, doesn't say that, okay, well, that's the way the world really is. This is, we're always going to be trapped within the way we render reality, in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the things like interpreting squares, or things like that are going to be very, very common, because there are these certain representations that will be common. The further you get up the conceptual hierarchy, especially where it becomes linked to emotions, the more priors, we haven't talked about
Mm-hmm.
this, priors, but the more priors that are kind of, can vary, are more
Mm.
subjective, that we bring to the table. So when we experience something, that experiencing really comes together in two terms within Bayes' theorem. One is the likelihood of the data. So
Mm-hmm.
the second is the way I'm seeing it. That what is this that I'm seeing? So I'm getting some sensory data, and is it a bottle? If this is so what's the probability that this sensory data that I'm getting, what's the probability of this sensory data given that it's a bottle, times the prior probability that it's a bottle? So if I look at it like a bottle, I might find that, oh, this is a high probability that this sensory data comes from a bottle, and so I'll interpret it like a bottle. but it depends on me bringing to bear a way of looking.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to things like emotions, I mean, the example I think the example of, human relationships, that, the look that she gave me, I'm kind of guilty. And so I'm looking for that. I'm interpreting her look, from the guilty lens. And so, oh, what haven't I done? I know what I haven't done. I haven't taken out the garbage or whatever. Right. Um, uh, you know, that is going to determine the way that my reality is experienced. A typical one that I normally give is like these very high level priors when you got depression or anxiety. If you have a depressed person might have these high level priors like, the world's a terrible place. I'm a useless person, and everything always goes wrong. And then they look at the world, they get the sensory data, and they say, "See, I told you, the glass is half full. It's a terrible place," because the data fits that model.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, then that reinforces that particular prior,
Mm-hmm.
and so you're
Mm-hmm.
going to get stuck into a loop. On the other hand, if you have a beautiful prior that the world is kind of like a gift, it's a miracle. I mean, it's just fertile and amazing. It's kind of like an Eden, and
Mm-hmm.
I look at the world and I say, look at these trees, look at this sun
Yeah.
shining through the leaves. It's spectacular. And
Mm-hmm.
yes, it is. And of course, then that
That.
reinforces. Now, of course, what we need for good human flourishing is that our priors are responsive to the sensory data so that they can be updated. And so
Mm-hmm.
we're not living in delusions. Okay. And and then they are conducive to human flourishing. So
Yeah.
this is what it is to be in a good life. Now, of course, there can be a lot of choice. So you certainly can go around with like depressed
Mm-hmm.
person, but it's going to be more conducive to human flourishing to have this other view. So that, this is this idea that there are these scales all the way from
Mm-hmm.
square being a square,
Right.
right through to these very high level views of looking at the world, in
Yeah.
I'm in a good mood or a bad mood.
Yeah. Something you just said made me think of. I was listening to Mark Miller's podcast, the Contemplative Science podcast,
Mm.
and he had something that struck me so vividly. Part of a longer kind of monologue here, but he said it turns out that a really important piece of the puzzle to make a prediction machine, and he was referring to this view of the brain as a prediction machine. He says it turns out a really important piece of the puzzle to make a prediction machine work well is that it learns that it's a prediction machine. And I thought that was really, you know it
Yeah.
is that a is that like the high is that the highest level prior, kind of, so,
That's very okay.
or maybe I'll just let you respond to that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, first of all, I love that. That is, I think that's code by Mark for awakening.
Yeah.
So it is recognizing that we are prediction machines. It's
Mm.
recognizing the fact that we construct all of this. And it's that recognition. If that becomes a top level prior,
Mm-hmm.
okay, then the state of day reification becomes persistent, and then we can just beautifully, be in the game, and then
Yeah.
and the most important thing is, in being in, one of the most powerful parts of that recognition. It's kind of like a recognition, is if you really grasp that recognition, it kind of puts you into reprogramming mode, or it's easier to go into reprogramming mode. You can kind of, like you do in psychotherapy, you can check out your beliefs and say, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I've been going around with this belief. That's not a great belief, actually. It's like I could look at the world in another way."
Right.
So it puts you into this reprogramming mode, and allows for more constructive belief structures or top
Mm-hmm.
level bias.
The other sort of area I was thinking about that I think is relevant on the kind of implication side of this is, for, the I would say I would kind of mark this kind of inflection point, the publication of a book called "The Body Keeps the Score" about
Mm.
trauma therapy and um, this somatic or body oriented view of the therapeutic process. And I'll just speak from my own experience that, I've spent time in psychoanalysis that I've, upon reflection, felt wasn't very fruitful. And I've spent time in this sort of somatic, body oriented approach to psychotherapy, let's say. And my experience of my experience has gotten better markedly, tangibly. And
Mm.
I can pretty confidently place it on the sort of the canonical practice or skill of observing the changing moment to moment sensation in that's happening in my system. Now, I say my system because, like, at certain points it doesn't feel like it's in my body. Like, I'm not even quite, it has a certain way of looking. It doesn't feel like there's a body, right? Like, it feels like there's just, movement or energy or pressure or tension or uh, heat or and it's this tuning into what's happening on a moment to moment basis that feels like, if I were to put it into my understanding of this language, it feels like updating is happening. That there is, like, you know, um, this idea of tension or gripping or, I can't remember the Buddhist terms for avoidance or clinging, tanha maybe,
Yeah.
like
I mean,
like
means
it
to
feels
try.
like that's happening, and it's not at a choice cognitive agentic level, but it's almost like, it's happening all throughout my system. This, inference of approach, avoid, threat, safety, uh, pleasure, displeasure are all feel like they're kind of, and it's happening. Is it in my mind? It's not story. That's the, okay. Coming back to this sort of thing, there is I wrote a piece a few months ago where I said phenomenology is the new psychology, because it feels like this conceptual narrative lens that I sort of kind of mark from Freud to cognitive behavioral therapy is kind of giving way to this phenomenological, experiential, somatic, direct experience approach, that perhaps is probably still fringe in, like, the academic world and in the world of payers and insurance and clinical training, but, to certain parts of uh, the culture that are kind of tuning into what we're talking about, it feels like, relevant to what we're talking about. Again, I'm not sure if I've made any sense there, so I will stop talking and let you respond to that.
Okay, so this is great. I, I absolutely think that the body and body sensations are an absolutely key part of the therapeutic process, and and from the predictive processing point of view, The brain has to figure out what's going on in the body as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think okay. So this this is a very very deep and complicated issue, but like I let's start really with emotions and basic sensations, which is that emotions are felt
Mm-hmm.
often in the body. So there's a tightening in the gut, and there's a tightening in the heart, and there's a racing pulse, or there's a fluttering, and there are all sorts of body sensations that are picked up. Now, but emotions are also more than body sensations. So there is one view, in the history of emotions, there was this cognitivist view and this body sensations. And eventually, we see that actually emotions are kind of quite complex things, but they're linked with this body sensations, but also have this cognitive overlay, this interpretation of what's going on with these body sensations. So I can feel some body sensations, and I can, if I'm kind of primed to feel it like excitement, I'll go, whoa, this is great. This is like something that's, I can have exactly the same body sensations, caused maybe just by a shot of
Mm-hmm.
adrenaline. But I can interpret it as anxiety, as
Mm-hmm.
fear, as something negative, depending on the context and the interpretation. So one of the things, as you really nicely said, is that moving away from these more story based, conceptual views and tuning into the underlying body sensations is very powerful technology. And
Mm-hmm.
how does it work? So, you know, the key thing is that we are actually paying attention and we are opening up to these sensations and allowing them, holding them within awareness
Mm-hmm.
with a kind of a mindful equanimity.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's just make this kind of like, normally you have a stimulus, someone like wearing a red shirt that always makes me irritable, and I respond. Um, and this happens kind of automatically. But if I can tune into the body sensations, this whole thing that's arising because of the stimulus, these body sensations that are tightening around the chest and giving me some sort of vibratory butterflies in my belly, and just hold them and observe them,
Mm-hmm.
fully allow them to, and sit there and just don't respond. Just I'm observing. Then what happens is that they are seen as this response process, but I'm no longer acting and acting out on them
Mm-hmm.
immediately. And what happens is that in this is a very simple idea in Hebbian learning. Neurons that wire together fire together. So if you don't respond in that stimulus
Yeah.
response pathway, you actually end up weakening that pathway for the next time.
Right.
So this is the this is called extinction therapy,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and this is how you can get rid of phobias and
Right.
various other things. So essentially, what's really happening by bringing mindful attention to the processes that are going on in the body, what we do is we go through this generalized extinction therapy.
Mm-hmm.
We weaken all these habitual patterns that are going on. Actually, we don't even need to know what they were about. You can so tune out of the cognitive story that
Yeah.
you don't even know what they were about. I mean, that's going to irritate a lot of
Well,
Freudians. Like, you know,
I mean, I almost my intuition, my hunch here is that the story perpetuates
yeah,
and so there's this paradoxical thing of unearthing, your story from pre, early life, that does it like almost like deepen
groove.
the groove, or I forget the term that's used in like a free energy landscape, but like, does it deepen that attractor that,
Yeah,
and so like the story sort of like is, anyway,
yeah, yeah.
I've had this hunch, and I'm like,
So,
wait a second,
so
this is the premise of like
I think
psychoanalysis.
okay, so I think we need to be a little bit careful. I think it is possible to do very skillful therapy using this extinction therapy model, for example. But it's harder,
Mm,
I would say, in general. For example, it's possible that within the context of a good and holding therapeutic relationship, you can bring up the story.
mm-hmm.
Every time you bring up the story, for example, some old childhood story, you
Sure.
get a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress and
Right,
a lot of
right.
response. Okay, so very big emotional response. So you've got the stimulus of the story and then this huge emotional response, and you're connecting the two every time you bring it up. And of course, it happens on steroids with PTSD.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
if within the context of a loving therapeutic relationship where you feel safe and relaxed, and you bring up the story and the emotional response is muted, it's just you sort of diffused from that effect, and you can
Mm-hmm.
then bring it up with more calm, peaceful,
Yeah,
objective view, being helped by that therapeutic alliance.
sure.
Then of course, you have weakened that pattern.
Yeah.
But of course, working in the body is this very powerful technology, and of course that's done. The thing with stories is that st- stories can get caught up. You can start
Mm-hmm.
thinking, oh, why did this guy do this? Why did he do
Yeah.
that? He's always doing that. Like this
Yeah.
always happens to me, and like you can get run away with the stories.
Yeah.
The thing with body sensations is that you can just they're so low level that you can just kind of tune into them. And if
Mm-hmm.
you're willing to open, so sometimes it's like people don't want to go there because it's kind of like, it seems like scary and like not nice,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, it literally is like a form of exposure therapy, like
Right.
not necessarily exposure to a memory, but exposure to the felt sense of that maybe I'm, one is avoiding, or even like just the felt sense of whatever the emotional response is to a situation.
Yeah. So there is this very important thing that happens with body sensations, which is that they can feel like, oh, terrible, I can't bear to feel that. Okay, so I'm really pushing it, so I don't want to feel it. But you know how it is when you see a scary movie and like, oh, it's really scary, I can't bear to look, it's like, oh my god, what's going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
But if you actually just look at the pixels that are going on in
Yeah.
the movie,
Right.
what you realize is, it's not that scary. It's like,
Yeah.
um, the way you make something scary is through the imagination. If you actually look, it's all just smokes and mirrors.
Right.
This
Right.
is really what's going on with the body sensation. It's
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
just smoke and mirrors. And when you tune into the body sensations and you're not afraid, you just open to them, then you realize that, what, even if it was, for example, pain, right? This is
Yeah.
real, I
Yeah.
can't bear it, whatever. But
Yeah.
you actually just open and just feel the micro sensations. And then you feel like there's this vibratory tinglingness in my knee or whatever. And then you realize, okay, so it's pain, but actually it's just made up of these sensations, and even not wanting those sensations is just other sensation or
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
constructions. So this is, of course, what happens in advanced meditation. You realize the whole game
Mm-hmm.
is just programmed to make you react in certain ways. If you can look through all of this and see it as, this is a technical word called empty, if you can see it as empty, which doesn't mean it's not there, what it
Yeah.
means is it's a mental construction. It doesn't actually have the grip. It's
Yeah.
real. It's kind of a real monster. No, it's just a constructed monster. When you
Yeah.
realize that you constructed it, it loses its grip to you. And then you can go through the extinction therapy.
So within a Bayesian view of this, I want you to check my thinking here or my understanding. But what I'm sort of picking up on is that there is what we're doing in this context of tuning into bodily sensations, whether that's in contemplative practice or somatic therapy or what have you, is that we're prioritizing or giving greater credence, weight, maybe to bottom up input sensations that is giving the higher, like the priors that this is pain or I, this is scary, this is threatening sensation. I don't want to feel this. Giving emphasis um, to the incoming sensory data so that the prediction errors are magnified, and then higher level priors then recalibrate or update. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Okay. So I think I'd rather recast it in a different way,
Please. Yeah,
which is
please.
which is that the reason why it's skillful to choose things in low level abstraction, sort of down the cortical hierarchy, like body sensations, is that we have a very strong habit of getting caught up in our thoughts. They are
Mm-hmm.
they are probably the most sticky stuff,
Yeah.
you know. And I would say eventually you come to see those as empty as well. But that requires more, that's sort of as you become more advanced, you eventually don't even need to go to body sensations. You can see thoughts as empty directly. But that is hard. So that's not where one would recommend people start. It's much easier to see body sensations as empty. But here's the key thing: this word emptiness, I'm using it with this word, but you can use it. You can talk about it as in a contemporary way as day reification or as seeing as a mental construction, so that even those low level body sensations, which are pretending to be a ghost or a monster, are
Mm-hmm.
seen through, and it's no longer a monster. They're seen as just a constructed monster, a
Yeah.
constructed something that I didn't want. So the key in all of it is seeing it as Mark would put it, as a prediction machine,
Mm-hmm.
or as day reified, or as empty,
Mm-hmm.
as a mental construction, because that's what allows you to relax and allow it with equanimity. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
then the body automatically reduces the synaptic weights of those pathways. Okay.
Right.
So it starts to dissolve the patterns.
Mm.
That is liberation. So we talked
Mm.
about awakening first. Tell me if you don't want to talk about this kind of like this
I
stuff. But
want to. I want to talk about this stuff.
okay, so we talked about awakening, which is like waking up within the generative model, becoming essentially mindful of the whole process being a mental construction. Okay, seeing things as empty doesn't mean it's not there, but it means that you're sort of seeing them as a mental construction. But then the liberation dimension is you start to unwind unhelpful behavioral and emotional patterns, essentially through this extinction therapy. So
Hmm.
so seeing things as empty is almost like a necessary condition to
Hmm.
then allow those patterns to unwind. This is what happens. People have a big awakening, for example, they can have a sudden big awakening, and then it takes maybe a number of years, maybe a decade.
Hmm.
But they slowly start to change and shift, and they unwind and they become, you know, less of a jerk or whatever. Um, and less selfish and less self-centered,
Yeah.
because all these patterns start to unwind. Now they may not fully unwind. You may choose that your idea of human flourishing is that actually I want to be a strong person, I want to make change in the world, I need
Yeah.
to push back. Okay, that's
Yeah.
the kind of thing that you're going to be doing. That's what it is for you to flourish as a human being.
Yeah.
Good. Someone else could be all gentleness and kindness.
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
so it's going to come out differently, and people can get stuck on the path and all sorts of things, but the
Yeah.
general idea is awakening and liberation.
Mm.
This is the sort of story of human flourishing. And there's a third dimension, which is wisdom, but you know
Interesting.
put it all on the table.
Um, I've heard you say that you, or let me ask you, like Rob Bea, I believe was a teacher of yours, and I'm curious if you were able to talk about like um, y- y- your interface with these ideas of free energy principle, Bayesian brain, in combination with kind of working with Rob, like because I feel like I've either heard you mention it or I seem like I have a hunch that
Yeah.
he uses the term fabrication, soul making dharma, ways of seeing, and I'm curious if like
Yeah. So
how these things kind of interact.
Rob was hugely influential in my own journey, and I think he was absolutely amazing. And as I've said in other talks, I see a lot of what I'm doing is kind of putting a theoretical, mathematical framework, kind of
Yeah.
modern computational, neurophenomenological framework on what he was talking about. As it happens, unfortunately, I actually couldn't really spend a lot of time with him because he was very sick during
Hmm.
this period where he was very influential on
Yeah.
me. So I was actually influenced by. I spent a lot of time at Gaia House, which is where he
Hmm.
was the resident teacher,
Yeah.
and I'm especially influenced by his senior student, his Dharma heir, Yahel Abigar, who is amazing. Uh,
Hmm.
and and it's a great shame. I would have loved to have kind of explained all this way of reinterpreting Rob to Rob, but
Hmm.
but he died in about 5 years ago, 4 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're absolutely right that essentially the sort of way of looking. So Rob's idea was that we fabricate our experience, and we can choose to look at the way we look at it affects the way things arise. So there's
Hmm.
a dependent co-arising between the way
Mm.
of looking and what and the sensory data that comes together. So
Right.
this way of this dependent co-arising is really these two terms of Bayes' theorem that I
Yeah.
talked. And so this is really I think a beautiful way of looking, and in a way, this sort of reconstruction project that I talk about of human flourishing is
Yeah.
essentially, he talked about things as soul making,
Yeah.
but I feel like it's exactly what I'm talking about, and it's really construction of a good life, a beautiful
Yeah.
life. flourishing life, a life that really matters, a life of however it's coming out for you, whether it's being an activist for Gaia, or whether it's helping the sick, or whether it's writing beautiful poetry, or whatever it is.
Where do I want to go from here? Are you good on time?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm like really enjoying this, and this is like I think people are gonna really enjoy this as well. So if it's okay with you, I'd love to go a little bit more. This feels like I in my kind of formative years of like intellectual formative years, college and such, there was Friedhof Capra was popular, and another book called like The Dancing Wu Li Masters, which was there's a lineage of trying to reconcile the East and the West. And what I feel, and I'd be interested in your take on sort of how I'm framing this, but what I feel is different here is that the lens through which we're talking about is about the process of perception and first person experience, and the science and the neuroscience therein, versus what I kind of felt from previous generations was trying to reconcile ancient wisdom with reality as it is, like the objective world. And I always felt like it was kind of jumping the shark, in the sense that invoking quantum relativity and quarks and very esoteric physics felt like felt like kind of the wrong tack. Maybe I'm mistaken there. But what's interesting here, and again, either something you've said that I've heard you say, is that what we're dealing with the free energy principle is kind of like a reconciliation of thermodynamics and information theory. And correct me if I'm wrong, but and again, sort of caching or framing this all within the science of relative perception and direct experience, the neuroscience related to that, is a completely whole different ballgame than trying to reconcile emptiness with the fact that the weight of an atom is concentrated in 99% of it, of the mass of it. Do you get what I'm saying? Like,
I do. Zach, your all of your questions are like, I really resonate with them. I think that there's a lot of you're really coming from this very intuitive place, which I was actually also really influenced by Fritjof Capra and the Tao of physics.
That's what it was, the Tao of physics. Yeah,
the Tao of physics, and this idea of reconciling ancient wisdom traditions, not just Eastern wisdom traditions. There's been Western mysticism as well, but sort of deep contemplative traditions with and wisdom with our latest science is a really important project. As I said, when we started talking, we can't. It doesn't work for us to have this cognitive dissonance. I mean, science is amazing. I mean, the example I just always love is like, our scientific theories are so amazing that, of course, not only do we get iPhones and go to the moon, but we can measure we can predict the anomalous magnetic moment of an electron to 13 decimal places, right? And as Richard Feynman said, that's like knowing the distance between LA and New York to within the width of a close to a human hair, right? It's ridiculously
Mm-hmm.
amazing that our models are so amazing of the universe that they can predict these tiny. So that's not to say we're gripping reality as it is. What
Yeah.
it's saying is that science has been science which is going on in our phenomenal world. It's
Yeah.
modeling a phenomenal world, and it's amazing. So this idea, it's just no good to say, oh, we got to just jettison all of science. No, like that
Yeah.
just does
Yeah.
not make any sense. And I can tell you that most of the great philosophers and wise people of old would be really into science today. I think
Mm-hmm.
for sure. Um,
Well, can I comment? I think there's one sort of like reflexive mistake that a lot of smart people make, and that is the assumption that people living throughout history were pseudoscientific or wishful thinking or somehow not intelligent and that and I think that that's a gross kind of miss on so I just wanted I
yeah,
just felt the
I,
implication to sort of say that like that feels like a real bias and blind spot in a lot of kind of considerations of anything from religion to Buddhism to Chinese medicine, etc. Right?
yeah,
Like,
no, I absolutely agree with that. But as you said, the issue. So we need bridges between science and spirituality,
mm-hmm.
and this approach that we've been talking about actually gives direct bridges. What have we got? We got a scientific story. I will say it's a story because we don't get out of stories actually. So
Right.
we have a scientific story that gives a direct understanding and explanation, a naturalized explanation of awakening. We have a scientific story that gives a naturalized explanation of liberation,
Mm.
okay, of extinction therapy. We have a scientific story that's making sense of mystical ideas like I am God, I am the one, I am the universe. Yes, this is a way of looking. This is, we can
Mm-hmm.
understand how this happens. This is all what we've talked about so far. And these bridges between science and spirituality, means that suddenly you realize, you know, it's all within a framework. Now, of course, the thing is that people are still going to say, well, now let's go further. Like, what is the nature of reality? And so, okay, well, we can start to speculate on like,
Yeah.
what does this mean? I mean, the fact that for example, we've talked about this dependent co-arising, where through two terms of Bayes' theorem we construct our experience. The way we look at it affects what we see, what we experience. Okay, that should start. People, of course, have speculated that, this seems to be like something to do with like quantum physics, and when we measure, when we ask nature some questions like measuring, nature responds. It sort of says, if we ask questions about the momentum, it responds about the momentum, and of course, then we lose information about the physical location. So I don't know what to say about that. I think that's very interesting. I think it's interesting, but it's sort of like let. I think there can be speculations about it, but we should be very careful in
Mm-hmm.
not jumping the gun or jumping the shark, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'm all for thinking about these things, but it's really coming from where can we find solid bridges, and
Mm-hmm.
not and even imagine where future bridges might lie.
Yeah.
So I love it. And I'm all for reducing these cognitive dissonances. I think that it's very, very helpful to have bridges between science and spirituality. Why? You know why? Because of human flourishing.
Hmm.
Because then people might think, maybe this stuff isn't so woo woo after all. Maybe I should have a meditation practice. Maybe I should do some yoga. Maybe I should do some therapy,
Yeah.
or try some therapeutic medicines.
Yeah. Um, we haven't really talked much about psychedelics at all, and I want to kind of offer you a chance to talk. I know you were involved in the formation of the Imperial program with Robin Carhart Harris, and a co-author on with him on several papers, including the Rebus model. And I guess I'm interested in sort of not putting you on the spot and sort of inquiring into your sort of personal experience, but like just the natural history of this interest and involvement here. Like
Yeah.
these seem very intimately related, and I'm curious if there's like a time course or sort of a story that how that came to be.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, I'm happy to talk about it because I have talked about it. And, well, the first guy, actually, Sam Harris caught me like right in the middle of the podcast and asked me directly, and then like make a decision there and then. Am I going to come clean and talk about this publicly? But I did, so now I have no problem talking about it. I actually think that psychedelics are a deeply, for me and for many others, they've been deeply important in one's spiritual journey.
Mhm.
And and I I actually so I started meditating like 37 years ago. So and I only took psychedelics like you know um, when I was like 52 for the first time. So I'd been meditating for almost 3 decades before that, right?
Mhm.
And that's very helpful, by the way. I'm going to talk about this a little bit to say that I think that that meditation really, really helps you get something marvelous out of psychedelics. I
Mhm.
think there's this two-way connection,
Yeah.
bicausal relationship between psychedelic journeying and meditation experience. And so, the first time I did psychedelics, I did them very intentionally in a therapeutic context, very powerful and very deeply important trip with mushrooms. And it's really interesting. The morning after my first trip, I went into the formless, in my meditation the next morning, I
Mhm.
went into the formless jhanas, way down into the formless jhanas. And of course, that's not a coincidence, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's like with all that meditation experience, it had kind of taken me to the next, broken through to the next level, into these, very advanced states of.
Had you were you working on the jhanas at that point? Was that part of your
I
practice?
wasn't. I wasn't.
Oh wow.
I mean, this is one of the funny things. I mean, this is why I don't believe that the jhanas are particularly scripted. I think we're literally unveiling the eigenvectors of experience. So you're deconstructing systematically in the jhanas in a sense, and I deconstructed the body. So I became infinite space, infinite
Mhm.
consciousness, all that kind of stuff. Completely, beyond the body, beyond,
Yeah.
and I, in fact, the funny thing is that like I think it was several months down the line that a meditation teacher told me, by the way, you do realize that you're in the jhanas. And I said, what are those? Okay,
Interesting.
so I didn't even know what they were, but I kind of described them very, very classically. First, all
Yeah.
this energy happens, this
Yeah.
vibration, all this joy and whatever, and then the body disappears and blah blah blah. Um, so I do think that, and further, I would say, I've done psychedelics very sparingly, and only like a couple of times a year or whatever, in therapeutic context. But especially for the first few years, I took high doses, which is probably the right approach, and for a while. Later
Yeah.
on, low doses is the way to go. But and I would say that some of the most powerful spiritual insights that I've had, the whole shebang, really came through these first few psychedelic journeys. And in a
Hmm.
sense, funny thing is that it then took me like 6 months to start to stabilize them so they would be a part of my everyday experience then.
Hmm.
So there's this beautiful interplay between
Yeah.
meditation and psychedelics. You can have these very powerful mystical insights in psychedelics if you can open up to them. And that's where
Right.
meditation really helps, because meditation will allow you to really, to open to the next level, by being mindful of what's going on in the psychedelic journey. But then you kind of need to stabilize this, integrate it, so that they become an everyday reality for you. So you can see the way. There are a lot of problems and false insights in
Yeah.
with psychedelics. So
Yeah.
to make you prone to see, to kind of, whereas in meditation, what can happen is that you can start to process them, through, and see, well, maybe that was just like, maybe I was smoking dope there or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the idea is that I think that this interplay is very, very beautiful.
Hmm.
And what I would say is that, um, these these deepest these deepest insights that one can get through psychedelics, need well, okay, there's a way. I think meditation can help you not get caught up in the fireworks of the psychedelic.
Right. Right.
The thing is, we talked about the heart, this the universal acid in the spiritual journey is this emptiness, seeing that it's a mental construction, seeing that you're a prediction machine,
Hmm.
seeing that things are deified. And that's where the liberation comes. That's where the awakening comes. That's where the suffering dissolves. Now, meditate that psychedelic experiences can be, wow, this is all amazing, and this is happening, and this is happening, and now, God, you're just showing off, this is just beyond. Okay, right, be like, whoa. Now you can reify that. This is,
Hmm.
you can reify that. The thing is that the most, if I were to give some sort of pointers to how to approach psychedelics, from in a very careful, if with someone who really is on the spiritual path and is doing this in a very careful way, you might, for example, if you can, say, as things unfold and this miraculous things are happening, that phenomenal high def stuff, who or what is having this experience?
Mm.
Or
Hmm.
what is having this experience? Who or what is having this experience? You might break frame every time you do that. Break frame, break frame, break frame. And suddenly you will see the screen, the
Mm.
consciousness, the
Mm.
awareness, which is capable of having all of these experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And more importantly than just the awareness, it's just the space of infinite possibility. By space, I'm talking about not a physical space. I'm talking about just the nothingness pregnant with all infinite possibilities that is being. So that's turning the light around.
Yeah.
And so there is this very beautiful role that psychedelics can have, but I feel like they're very potent medicines. They're potentially very disturbing,
Yeah.
can be destabilizing. There's all these, one has to treat them very, very carefully. And they can also just be not helping. One can just simply be reifying these experiences. Cool, I saw God, oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
Um, the, the sort of the deeper aspect is, can one really start to integrate them as part of a spiritual path?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense.
I love that. I mean, I want to start kind of to land the plane here and be mindful of your time but can we look forward in terms of how you see this understanding kind of my read is like this is starting to percolate out into obviously contemplative circles or maybe limited the psychedelic circles. Computational psychiatry is a term that I've seen heard. Um, I'm curious how you see your like involvement, career. I heard you say at one point you wanted to do a master class on, the free energy principle, and have been waiting to hear when that's gonna come out. But what are you excited? And also I should mention you just published a paper with Ruben Laukkanen. I hope I'm pronouncing his name closely to it. But like, what do you? I mean, you're obviously passionate about this, and you can tell it's like the meaning and the interest and the passion for this just pours out of you. And um, from my perspective, I can see it being like a really fundamental piece of the puzzle for the domains that we've been talking about, psychedelics, and integrating that into preparation and intention setting and integration, training of psychotherapists. Like I feel like the profession of mental health professionals hasn't picked up on this scent quite yet. What do you plan to work on and sort
Yeah.
of?
Yeah. Well, that's I mean, this summer, Ruben and I spent like, 2 straight months just in this, like, as he put it in his Substack or the Twitter thread. We were caught in a in a level 5 cyclone inside.
Yeah.
It was pretty incredible because we've been working on this stuff together independently for a decade and we realized that to really understand what's going on in meditation, we need to go all the way through to consciousness. And so we wrote this predictive processing paper, predictive processing theory of consciousness called the beautiful loop. We technically call it epistemic depth theory.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of an academic. I'm at Oxford and also in Imperial and all of this stuff. But really, um, I want to help these bridges between science and spirituality, and having been a practitioner and also coming from the science side, I feel like this is what my journey. This is what the universe wants to do through me. Like
Hmm.
causes and conditions. For some reason, I have all this theoretical stuff and
Yeah.
mathematical, and I've been meditating, and it all just wants to come together in through this lens. In to talk about human flourishing, and that for me, that's what I want to continue to do. That I actually feel like what I'm planning to do is write a book.
Mm. Oh, great.
Bringing this whole thing together. The
Yeah.
book is the kind of stuff that we talked about, which really forms a theoretical backbone of some future potential pragmatic dharma.
Mm. Hmm.
It's to help this theoretical backbone of a future pragmatic dharma, and I think pragmatic dharma has been fantastic. I mean, I'm very close to Michael Taft. Michael Taft is a mentor and teacher for me, and Shinzen Young, and many
Hmm.
other people in pragmatic dharma, and I feel like bringing it together with the science is what is
Yeah.
actually needed. And I come at it from the science and the philosophy and all of that. So that's really what I'd like to do. I mean, in terms of the masterclass on the free energy principle, I actually did there is a YouTube video if anyone wants the math of it. There's all the kind of math stuff already on online. But I feel like where I really want to go
Hmm.
is put it down as a book and maybe as a course or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So my general view is that I'm very pluralist in the sense that let a thousand flowers bloom.
Yeah.
I love that all sorts of teachers are coming at it from all sorts of ways. There are all these different views, and I have one view, one flower to offer in this whole journey that people can pick and choose from.
Hmm. You strike me as an optimistic person. Is
Yeah,
that is that
it is.
true?
Yeah, it is true. It is. I really feel optimistic. I feel like I think the world is an amazing place. I think we have made enormous progress. I think that this renaissance of spirituality and meditation and psychedelics is happening when it needs to.
Yeah.
I I feel that doesn't mean that we don't need to worry about the things that we need to worry about. Otherwise,
Sure.
things won't
Sure.
continue to go well. But
Yeah.
I mean, of course, there are things to worry about. But I'm fundamentally optimistic, and the reason why I'm fundamentally optimistic is because I feel like there's a kind of a fertile cosmos. It's like the universe wants to express this free energy. Well, now we're talking about kind of traditional free energy. Would wants to express this gift of free energy that was given at the Big Bang. This order.
Hmm.
It's kind of letting it percolate out, and it's coming through in all this amazing complexities that the ecosystem and the trees and the evolution and the stars and galaxies, and it's expressing itself, and there's life and there's consciousness, and there's love and there's hate and there's drama and there's, all sorts of stuff.
It's all
And
of it.
yeah, it's great.
Has that always been the case
With me, in
for
optimism,
you? Yeah.
I I think intuitively it has.
Hmm.
Somehow, you know, when I was like 20 or 21, I kind of intellectually felt these same things, like how ecosystems spontaneously come to create order, how
Yeah.
um,
Mm.
how gradients of free energy spontaneously organize themselves into hexagonal cells, or into whirlpools, or other dissipative
Hmm.
structures. How complexity spontaneously forms, and somehow this was linked to kind of a Hegelian process of the zeitgeist exploring itself and going through a dialectical process of thesis, antithesis, synthesis into more and more expressions. I'm a big fan of Hegel, actually, in the sense that, where he felt this was ultimately going was that, this process, this dialectical process of the infinite exploring itself, is ultimately about the infinite waking up to itself,
Mm.
and we're all a part of that story. This is just a story I'm giving you. I'm not giving you,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
it's a story, and it's a beautiful story, and it's a story that I tune in from time to time, and I think
Hmm.
that it really is one that resonates with me, and that when we wake up and become aware, and we are these islands of awareness that can can look back upon the universe that gave rise to its looking back onto itself. We are a small part of that awakening process of the whole, and where
Mm.
Hegel felt this process of this dialectical ultimately come to this zeitgeist is the absolute, knowing the absolute. That's a very, it's amazing how intuitive you were. Now I'm just coming out to say that that's a very optimistic view.
Hmm.
In fact, I would go, like, now that you brought out this kind of vibe in me right now, which is um, Teilhard de Chardin was a Jesuit mystic, kind of, who also took this Hegelian view where he ultimately felt like it's all going towards the omega point, where
Hmm.
the universe will wake up to itself, the infinite will wake up to its full expression. And I think, that's certainly thermodynamically, it feels like there really is a kind of teleology. Teleology got a very bad name because it was kind of, we had to work in terms of efficient causes at some stage in the 17th century and 18th century, and sort of got thrown out with the baby got thrown out with the bathwater.
Can
But
you remind me what teleology means?
teleology is a kind of a cause or an explanation that looks
Hmm.
towards going towards some sort of goal state, going
Okay.
towards, normally
Mm.
explanations is like A causes B causes C. So if these are
Yep.
efficient causes coming from the back.
Yep. Yep.
When we say the flower grows towards
Towards
sunlight,
the sun.
this is a teleological explanation. When we
Interesting.
say that the universe is trying to dissipate entropy, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, it's trying to dissipate as fast as possible. And it turns out that just sitting there like a ball of, hot gas or whatever, just dissipating away, that takes forever. It's way more efficient to have kind of whirlpools or suns or things coming together into little islands of order which then end up dissipating way more than the disordered stuff. So we are those islands of order, and we end
Mm.
up dissipating way more than the universe would without us. In other words, you need little factories, a little organized factories of dissipation to actually
Hmm.
get somewhere. And within those factories, the ones that become smarter and more intelligent and know how to move towards free energy gradients
Yeah.
end up dissipating even faster. And then it may be that waking up and becoming conscious and like having generalized intelligence is even a way to dissipate even faster. And so that seems to be that the universe not only spontaneously organizes into complex systems due to thermodynamic gradients, due to a kind of a literally a force, a thermodynamic force
Hmm.
that's pushing towards disorder, but it a natural tendency is to create complexity, is to create life, intelligence, and consciousness, and that's kind of amazing.
That's kind of amazing.
Yeah, and it's not just like, oh, this is some sort of dream or this is some religion or whatever. No, no,
Yeah,
you can
yeah, no.
show this using non-equilibrium thermodynamics. In fact, non-equilibrium thermodynamics was only like figured out in the last 20, 30 years. And yeah, I mean, it sort of generalizes the second law to
Yeah.
non-equilibrium to far from equilibrium systems. And you know, that's what we are. And you end up with these kind of non-equilibrium steady states that end up dissipating faster, and then the ones that are smarter can dissipate even faster. And that's what we are. We're just whirlpools and eddies and vortices, you know, turbulent vortices of structured order within the cosmos,
Hmm.
and somehow that wonderful patterning is waking up to itself. This is amazing.
I asked you this question, this line of questioning about optimism, and if it's been the case, because it has not always been the case for me. Like, I think that, I remember so clearly in 2016 ish, it must have been, maybe even no earlier, because we were just driving down to the beach from, we were living in New York City at the time, driving to the beach with my wife, then girlfriend, and we were talking about having kids. And to me, I just remember thinking, like, we're not there. There's not going to be water supply. It was just like, I just had a very, what I thought of as a smart and rationalistic but ultimately a pessimistic view. And at some point, I think through doing this type of work of just like following my curiosity about stuff that I'm interested in, it has by no causative force of my own just like rendered an optimistic worldview, um, that I it, I'm grateful that it has. I'm surprised that it has, and I feel like kind of a lot of the things that we are talking about. I wonder if there's a way of sort of offering that up, because I think so much of human suffering comes from, you might say, a prior or a belief about a pessimistic,
Yeah,
negative sum worldview.
yeah,
Um,
like the depression prior. I mean, you know, the
yeah,
opposite of
yeah,
depression and anxiety is kind of this optimism, and doesn't mean that you don't have wisdom about it, that
of
it doesn't
course.
record
Yeah,
the sensory data. So someone
yeah,
who's like um, optimistic about like getting to the airport on time, you know, they miss enough flights, and they'll have to refigure their priors. And so, you know, there is this view, but I think, you know, it's just sometimes the stories that we live by help to influence the way the world develops.
yeah.
But having said everything is a story, you know, when I tune into this optimistic view, I really, I'm like living within it, and I think it's a, I can't see, I feel like it's a beautiful way of looking at the world.
Hmm.
First of all, it's very meaningful,
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah.
that living with meaning and purpose is very helpful, and it's meaningful in a way that is not like smoking dope. This
Yeah.
this can be figured out from scientific basis. It's not an unreasonable perspective to hold, and I think that maybe it's helpful for people to tune into this because it makes life beautiful
Hmm.
and loving, and you start to feel the miracle that out of all of this has come. Somehow there's something rather than nothing
Hmm.
amazing, and from a human perspective, it feels to come out of, it feels like love.
Yeah. Want to I so appreciate the time that you're spending with me today, and really grateful for it. Where does the? I mean, I there's a I can just sense that there's people that are picking up on this scent, right? Like you've done several podcasts, Michael Taft, Sam Harris. There's communities online that are picking up on this, and it feels like it's deserving of a book, of a course, of a conference, of a community that. And I'm curious: is that? Do you see that happening? Is there, is the Center for Eudaimonia? I can't remember the full name of it. Forgive me, but like where's the hub? Where's the home? Where's the spiritual home of this movement or
I, th-
theme?
I think there are I think there are various overlapping communities that are going on. I think the pragmatic Dharma community is very beautiful and helpful in this whole process. I think that there are a lot of spiritual, there are a lot of advanced practitioners
Hmm.
who are also scientists like me, working in this area, like Ruben Laconin, like Lars Sandberg Smith, like Mark Miller, like there are a number of people working. There are Sean Preston, Australia. Like there's a number of them coming up, and the fact is that that makes me optimistic. And in the
Yeah.
sense, I genuinely think that there are a dozen very advanced practitioners. There's Thomas Metzinger is a philosopher rather than a scientist who wrote this amazing book. Shout out for it, "The Elephant and the Blind," which has
Is that
done.
his most recent book?
Yeah, yeah, and
Okay, good. Because I've been working through this, and I
oh,
realize it's about 15 years old.
yeah, but
Um,
it's amazing. No, look,
yeah.
if anyone was to just read the Ego Tunnel, you know,
Okay,
look,
good.
I mean, I owe a huge debt to Thomas. I mean, Thomas, he wasn't talking about it in terms of Bayesian predictive processing and all this kind of stuff. He was talking about philosophically, but like he was saying the same thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
So Thomas Metzinger and the Elephant in the Blind is like looked at. He's interviewed thousands of advanced meditators to look at experiences of pure consciousness,
Hmm.
pure awareness, and then put it together in this book. It's a very long book, 500 pages. Um, but this is all part of this building bridges between science and spirituality,
Yeah.
philosophy and spirituality. And so I'm kind of optimistic that I think that we really do have a growing community
Yeah.
of people who are advanced practitioners, but also working on the theoretical side of things, and who will be able to, we're all kind of talking to each other
Yeah.
and coming at it with different lenses, different views, different stories. Like, and there was a time where I feel like, oh no, I've got to figure out the right story, and then like, the true story.
Yeah.
There is no true story. It's
Mhm.
like there. That doesn't mean that doesn't give us relativism. So this is important. I just want to make this clear
Yeah.
because people could think that I'm being a postmodern relativist. I do think postmodernism is super important to say that we can't get outside of our narratives. But where I think it goes, you start off with this, the last, from 200 years ago, we start with modernism, and then we get this postmodern shift in the 20th century where we realize that there's just these narratives, that there is no Archimedean point that I can stand outside the stories and judge them from.
Mm.
But then that has the specter of relativism, which is that anything goes.
Yeah.
But
Right.
that also doesn't work. So then we
Right.
come to the next phase of the Hegelian dialectic. So we had modernism, we had postmodernism, and now we have metamodernism, which is a kind of trying to do the synthesis. So I see myself as in that metamodern stance. So I say it's all stories, but I also say, with an ironic twist, that some stories are better than other stories.
Hmm.
Then you say, well, then what's the criteria for betterness of stories? And then I will say that they are other stories. That's also a story, the criteria for better stories. But the kind of thing we're talking about is stories that cohere with others. A lot of other stories are good stories. So that's called coherence.
Hmm.
Stories that allow me to predict my sensory data
Yep.
are good stories. In other words, that's empirical value. That's the science, like empiricism. Stories that are economical and parsimonious are good stories. In other words, Occam's razor stories.
Hmm.
You compare them down. Stories, simpler stories are better than other stories, given that they
Yep.
take the same sensory data, given that they cohere with as many beliefs. Stories that have pragmatic value for our survival.
Mm.
Story,
Mm.
right? Stories that are conducive to human flourishing. So these,
Mm.
I'm giving you ideas, but those are just other story structures. So I'm not claiming to find a Archimedean point.
Mm.
Just saying that there can be better stories than worse stories, and then if you want to have an argument about that, let's play. Let's
Yeah.
let's let's see. There's this huge raft, all of planks, just cohering with each other, floating on the ocean. 5,000, thousands of planks, and then there's some other story structure with about like 15 rickety planks. And then
Yeah.
we can sort of say, well, even though we're both floating on the ocean, I reckon
Yeah.
my story structure is better than yours. And then the other guy says, no, forget it. And this is, of course, well, I don't want to get into controversial, but like, this is what happens. Some
Yeah.
fundamentalist says, no, 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 I've got these 15 stories that cohere together.
Yeah.
We can turn around to them and say, I don't think your story is very good.
Yeah. 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 Wow. What's real quickly, what this is making me think of is there's a kind of a niche area of physical therapy, like the world of physical therapy and clinical work, where people who are living with chronic pain, whether that is, the overwhelming majority, let's put it this way, the overwhelming majority of people who are living with some form of musculoskeletal chronic pain, primarily, it's not the result of tissue damage, pathology, right? It is become a learned sensation in response to an injury, fear, and there's a domain of that's called pain science education. Lorimer Moseley is kind of like the father of that. He's actually from Oxford, but an Australian PT. Anyway, the long story short of it is that there is therapeutic value in revising people's core beliefs about what's going on in their body as it relates to chronic persistent pain.
Yeah.
That if there's a prior, if there's a belief, if there's an understanding that they have a slipped disc, right? This is where language gets important. And they start to live their life in such a way is that they don't want that slipped disc to slip out. That creates this cognitive, emotional, behavioral pattern that perpetuates a phenomenal, the subjective experience. And there's an intervention that is sort of countering those beliefs and those priors and recapitulating their understanding to what's called like a, neurocentric or a sort of a top-down sort of understanding of pain as an output of the brain kind of thing. It's very related to this. It is a predictive and protective and adaptive, phenomena. And that can unwind the pattern of persistent and chronic pain. And you could argue that that's simply by changing the narrative or the
Yeah.
story. There's an iatrogenic story that's happening and it's usually kind of delivered in the clinic when people are explained what's going on to them. This pathoanatomical view is actually adds fuel, you could say, to the subjective experience of persistent pain.
I think that's great.
So this is where I kind of see like the cash value of what the work that you're doing actually, in contemplative practice, in psychotherapeutic, in the broad category of human flourishing is like recasting our understanding of our experience, ourself, our place in the world as general, in a more therapeutic, pro-social, advantageous, adaptive light. Because I feel like there's so much of, the human experience, for better or for worse, is cast in almost like a pathoanatomical kind of, if I were to make an analogy. And you could argue that like, the God-shaped hole or the religion-shaped hole is kind of, there is those structures served a purpose of placing us in a proper story. You might say.
This is really very beautiful because I think these high level priors can go so deep into the body because we talked about this hierarchical. We didn't kind of mention that like these priors actually sit in a hierarchical structure. So top level priors provide priors for the models below, and those models then function with the data that's coming up to provide priors for the models below that. And there's kind of maybe half a dozen layers in the brain of these hierarchical processing, but they go all the way into the body. This is how everything works. And so the body and the immune system and the pain system is also kind of like the pain system. So if you have this top level prior that no, everything's okay, I'm totally fine, right? That can go all the way down, and if there's some pain signals that are coming, there'll be a prediction error. Now the question is, who wins? Like, where does that come up to?
Right.
Change this level prior, in which case, okay, no, I really am in pain. I'm like, I can't fool myself. Like, I really am. It's terrible. Or does it go like, no, I mean, actually, you're not in pain. There's a mistake here. So we'll change this prediction error. So it changes something below that. And you see this effect all the time. This turns out to be the most powerful effect in medicine. Everyone knows this. It's called the placebo effect. That's why it's such a nightmare trying to do trials, because the damn
Yeah.
placebo effect is so powerful that you kind of have to do all this controlled stuff because it's too good, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, so it's a problem for for medicine, but it's amazing when you put it the other way around, um, and say, huh, there's this placebo effect. So I mean, it starts off with, like, in the Second World War, where you know this surgeon was on the battlefield and, like, ran out of morphine to give the soldiers for analgesia, and eventually I didn't know what to do, but, like, had to operate, otherwise he's and started giving them saline, and a number. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe half, more than half of the soldiers actually responded and didn't feel pain. Went through the surgery now, or didn't feel as much pain, but somehow got through surgery. This is amazing that this can happen. So much so that what we now know is that this kind of effect, when people, it goes, because we have this predictive processing model has various outputs, including the motor system, so I can move, but also has neuroendocrine system and
Yeah.
the neuroimmune system, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can actually end up saying, having these very powerful top level priors, someone in a white coat, maybe they're not as powerful as they used to be 50 years ago, but, like, someone in a white coat says, oh, you're fine. You're absolutely fine. The tests show you're great, whatever, everything's fine. And you go, oh, I'm fine. Like, no problem. Like, great. And then, but as you cascade down, there's this sort of inflammation or whatever, and, like, the immune system goes, we've got a prediction error here. So it's
Yeah.
not actually fine. So what ends up happening is that you end up producing more antibody titers. So you actually see an increase in antibody titers because the guy
Right.
in the white coat said you're fine. Oh
Yeah.
my god! I mean, this is incredible. This is how the immune system. I mean, this weird effect of the placebo effect. Works. I mean, the placebo effect is so ubiquitous. We can
Yeah.
tell all sorts of stories around it, and they're bound to be true because it pretty much works everywhere. So the fact is that this system, and especially in this pain system, like I can imagine, actually, yeah, my collaborator Ruben told me a story about, which I
Oh
think,
yeah. Yeah. I read his
yeah,
account of his
which,
experience.
which, is,
Yeah.
which is on Twitter, so you can. I mean, he's been public about it. But I mean,
Yeah.
he had this terrible. I think it was this slip disc thing that was just halfway out, or I can't remember the exact detail.
Yeah.
But it was just so. It was 10 out of 10 pain, as in,
Yeah.
like, he could hardly talk, breathe, or anything. It was just so incredible, and and but he's a very advanced practitioner, very advanced meditator, and so when he got given ketamine by the paramedics, by the I don't know what you call paramedics in the US, but
Paramedics. Yeah.
yeah, okay. Uh, he somehow he was able to reset all these priors or
Yeah.
whatever, and he walked into hospital after that. Like, it
Yeah.
was incredible. Like, I just
Yeah.
couldn't believe, it's just, yeah, check it out on Twitter for people. Like,
It's
it's incredible.
um this has been like fantastic. I kind of joke and say that this podcast and this project is a selfish endeavor, and then in exchange for kind of satisfying my own curiosity, I share it with people, and that's a pretty good deal. But this has been like really phenomenal, and so I want to thank you for your generous time, and um, I think that people are really going to like this, and I think that grateful for the work that you're doing and the way that you're presenting it, and I I really think it's just like I'm so optimistic about where this can take us. So thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, it's been a great pleasure to be on. Thank you.
Yeah.